Level 1. You are 27 and you are flying private for the first time in your life, except it is not really yours. A client booked it, or your boss did, and you are walking across the tarmac toward a small jet with your one bag, trying to look like this is normal. There is no terminal, no line, no taking off your shoes. A man in a quiet uniform takes your bag and calls you by your name, and you climb 4 steps into a cabin that smells like leather and cold air, and you sit in a seat that is wider than your first apartment's couch. The engines spool up, and you are in the sky in minutes, looking down at the airport you used to wait in for hours. And here is the thing nobody tells you about this exact moment. The first time on a private jet does not make you rich. It makes you aware. Aware that an entire layer of the world exists above the one you have been living in, a layer with no lines, no waiting, no friction, and that the people in it do not think of it as luxury. They think of it as normal. You spend the whole flight pretending you belong, and somewhere over the clouds a small, dangerous thought arrives that will either ruin you or build you. I want this. Not the flight. The life that makes the flight ordinary. The people who waste this moment spend the next 10 years chasing the feeling, booking a charter they cannot afford to feel it again. The people who use it do something colder. They go home, and they get to work on becoming the kind of person who never has to pretend on a tarmac again. The jet was never the point. The awareness was. The cruel part is that this awareness arrives with no instructions. Nobody on that plane tells you how they got there. And if you ask, they will give you a vague answer about hard work that explains nothing. So you are left with the wanting and no map, and what you do with that gap decides everything. Most people let the wanting curdle into resentment, into the belief that the world is rigged and the door is closed. A few let it sharpen into a question they will spend a decade answering. What does the person who owns this actually do differently than me? That question, asked seriously and answered honestly, is worth more than the flight ever was. Because the flight ends in a few hours and you go back to the airport with the lines. The question stays with you. And if you are the kind of person who can sit with it without flinching, it slowly rebuilds you from the inside. At this level, you taste it. Level 2. You are 34 now and you are standing at a charter desk booking your own flight for the first time, with your own money, and your hand is not quite steady as you confirm the price. It is a single leg, a few hours, and it costs more than your parents' first car. You tell yourself it is for the business, that the time saved is worth it, and that is half true. The other half is that you remember the tarmac at 27 and you swore you would come back here on your own terms. Now you have. You learn the language fast. You learn that a light jet is different from a mid-size, that empty leg flights cost a fraction of the price if you are flexible, that the broker who books it takes a cut you can negotiate. You are not wealthy enough to own anything, not even close, but you have crossed a line that most people never cross. You have become a buyer in a market most people will never enter. The danger at this level is intoxication. The first few flights feel so good, so smooth, so frictionless, that the temptation is to fly private when you should fly commercial, to spend the money you should be reinvesting, to buy the feeling instead of building the machine that pays for it. The people who fail here confuse access with wealth. They charter constantly and quietly bleed themselves dry, addicted to a status they have not actually earned yet. The people who climb treat the charter as a tool, not a trophy. They fly private when the time saved genuinely buys them more than the ticket costs, and they fly commercial without shame when it does not. They understand that real money is not spent looking rich. It is spent becoming richer. There is a quieter lesson buried in this level too. The first time you pay for the flight yourself, you feel the weight of the number in a way the people born into it never will. And that weight is actually an advantage. It keeps you honest. It forces you to ask whether each flight earns its cost. And that habit of interrogation is exactly what separates the person who climbs from the person who plateaus here forever. The ones who grew up with this access never developed the muscle because they never had to. You did. So you fly with a kind of discipline they lack, treating every leg as a decision rather than a default, and that discipline compounds into capital while there's leaks away into comfort. The charter, at this level, is not a status symbol. It is a test of whether you can hold your nerve and your standards while standing inside something designed to make you lose both. At this level, you buy. Level 3. You are 41 and you have a card in your wallet that most people have never heard of, a fractional membership, 25 hours a year on a specific class of aircraft. You no longer call a broker and negotiate. You call a number, and a plane appears. The friction is gone entirely, and with it goes something you barely notice leaving. The sense that flying is an event. It is no longer an event. It is a Tuesday. You fly to a meeting and back the same day the way you used to take a train. Your time has quietly become the most expensive thing you own, and you have started spending money specifically to protect it. This is the level where the math inverts. For most of your life, you traded time to save money. Now you trade money to save time, and you do it deliberately, because you have finally understood that time is the only asset that does not compound back. The danger here is subtler than before. It is that the convenience makes you soft, that you start flying private for trips that do not need it, that the membership becomes a lifestyle rather than a lever. The people who fail at this level let the access dull their edge. They forget the tarmac at 27. The people who climb keep the discipline even as the friction disappears. They use the hours to do more, to be in 2 cities in a day, to close the deal in person that a competitor tried to close by phone. They treat the membership as a multiplier on their productivity, not a cushion for their comfort. The card in their wallet does not make them feel arrived. It makes them feel armed. There is something else that crystallizes at this level, something almost philosophical. You begin to understand that the truly wealthy do not buy things. They buy back time, and then they reinvest that time into building more wealth, which buys back more time, in a loop that accelerates the higher you climb. The membership is your first real taste of that loop. Every hour the plane saves you is an hour you can pour back into the thing that generates your money, and that compounding of reclaimed time is invisible to everyone watching from below, who see only a man getting on a plane. They think you are spending. You are actually investing in the one resource you can never manufacture more of. The people who understand this never go back. The people who do not understand it eventually let the membership lapse, deciding it was an extravagance, never realizing it was the most rational purchase they ever made. At this level, you access. Level 4. You are 48, and you are sitting across a table from a broker who is showing you aircraft, actual aircraft, with tail numbers and maintenance logs and delivery dates. You are buying a plane, not chartering, not a membership. Owning. The number on the page has more zeros than your first house had, and the man across the table is watching to see if it makes you flinch. It does not, and that lack of flinch is the entire story of how you got here. At this level, the jet stops being a service you buy and becomes an asset you hold, with everything that comes with it. A flight crew on payroll, a hangar, maintenance that costs more per year than most people earn. You learn that owning a jet is less like owning a car and more like owning a small, demanding company that exists to move you through the air. This is the level where you discover the brutal truth of aircraft ownership, that the purchase price is the cheap part, that the real cost is the bleeding that never stops, the crew, the fuel, the insurance, the depreciation eating the value while it sits in the hangar. The people who fail at this level buy the jet as a trophy and are slowly crushed by the carrying cost, forced to sell at a loss within a few years. The people who climb by it as a tool whose cost is trivial against the value of their time and the deals it lets them close. They run it like a business line. They charter it out when they are not using it. They treat the depreciation as the price of a weapon, not the loss of a toy. They own it because owning it costs them less than not owning it. This is also the level where ownership changes how the world treats you. The moment you own the aircraft rather than rent it, a different set of doors opens, because ownership signals permanence in a way that chartering never does. People who would not return your calls when you were a member now take the meeting, because owning the asset says you are not going anywhere, that you have crossed into the class that builds rather than borrows. And yet the people who handle this level best never let that signal go to their head. They know the jet is a depreciating machine, not a measure of their worth, and they keep the same cold arithmetic they used at the charter desk years ago. The danger is that ownership feels like an ending, like you have finally made it. And that feeling is precisely when people stop climbing. The ones who keep going treat the owned aircraft as just another rung, a tool that serves the next 10 years of building, not a monument to the last 10. They sign the papers without ceremony and get back to work. At this level, you own. Level 5. You are 55 and you no longer think about individual flights at all. You have a flight department. People whose entire job is to make sure that wherever you need to be, an aircraft is fueled, crewed, and waiting. You have stopped owning a jet and started operating a capability. The conversation in your head has changed completely. It is no longer which plane, it is which base, which routes, which aircraft for which mission, the long-range one for the transatlantic leg, the smaller one for the regional hops. You think like an airline that serves exactly one customer. This is the level where the jet stops being about you and starts being about the enterprise. Your time is now so valuable, and the things that depend on you so numerous, that the aircraft exists to keep the entire machine of your wealth moving without interruption. The danger at this level is invisible, and it is about attention. With this much infrastructure, the thing most likely to erode you is no longer cost. It is complacency, the slow drift into letting the capability run your life rather than serve it. The people who fail let the operation become an end in itself, a fleet maintained for status. The people who climb keep ruthless clarity about why the capability exists, what it is for, what it enables. They treat it as a tool of leverage at the largest scale, a way to compress geography itself so that distance never costs them an opportunity. They have made the world small. There is a strange loneliness that begins to creep in at this level, and almost no one talks about it. When distance no longer costs you anything, when you can be anywhere by morning, the friction that used to shape your life is simply gone, and friction, it turns out, is part of what made experiences feel real. The people who handle this will use the compression of geography deliberately to be present for the things that matter, to show up in person where it counts, to turn their reach into genuine leverage. The people who handle it poorly find that having everywhere available means belonging nowhere, that a life with no friction is also a life with no anchor. The aircraft gave them the world and quietly took away the sense of place. The ones who climb past this level are the ones who decide, consciously, what all this capability is actually for, who refuse to let the machine of their own wealth dictate where they spend their finite days. They operate the capability. They do not let it operate them. At this level, you operate. Level 6. You are 62, and you are not buying aircraft anymore. You are buying the companies that own them. Somewhere in this range, you have crossed from being a customer of private aviation to being an owner of the industry itself. A stake in a charter operator. A position in a management company. A piece of the terminals, the hangars, the maintenance networks that everyone below you depends on. The man who once pretended to belong on a tarmac at 27 now owns parts of the tarmac. You think in terms of fleets, of fuel contracts, of the economics of an entire sector that you used to be a single passenger inside. This is the level where the jet stops being a cost and becomes a source of capital. The asset that used to bleed you dry now generates returns, because you are no longer paying for access, you are selling it. There is something else that happens at this level that nobody warns you about. The people around you stop telling you the truth. The brokers, the operators, the advisors. All of them want your capital, and all of them shade what they tell you to get it. The honest, abrasive feedback that sharpened you on the way up gets quieter and more careful the higher you climb. The people who keep commanding at this level go out of their way to keep one or two people who will still tell them they are wrong. Because at this scale, a single unchallenged bad assumption can cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. They command by subtraction. They say no to almost everything and reserve themselves for the handful of decisions that move the whole sector. The hardest adjustment at this level is psychological. Everything that got you here was about personal hunger, about wanting the flight, then the membership, then the plane. Now the hunger has to transform into something colder and larger, a sense of how an entire industry moves and where the leverage in it actually sits. The people who cannot make that shift stay rich but stop growing, content to own their plane and clip along. The people who make it stop seeing aviation as a thing they consume and start seeing it as a board they play, where fuel contracts and terminal rights and fleet economics are the pieces. They have stopped being a passenger in every sense. They sit above the system now, watching the flows of money through it, positioning their capital where the whole sector has to pass. The 27-year-old who pretended to belong would not understand a single conversation this man has anymore. And that distance, measured not in dollars, but in how a person thinks, is the real measure of how far the climb has carried him. At this level, you command. Level 7. You are 69 and the aircraft no longer means anything to you personally, because the conversation is no longer about you at all. At this level, your capital owns infrastructure that thousands of people depend on. The terminals where other people's jets land, The companies where pilots and engineers and crews collect a paycheck they never think twice about. The networks that move an entire class of people through the sky. You have crossed, almost without noticing the line, from flying private to being part of the system that makes private flight exist. And the question changes completely. It is no longer how do I get where I am going. It is how does this outlast me? You start thinking in terms that have no natural endpoint, in trusts and holding structures and entities designed to carry the thing forward long after you are gone, into the hands of people not yet born. The jet that thrilled you at 27 is now a rounding error in something vast and quiet that you are simply the steward of. The people who reach this level and waste it are the ones who never make the shift, who keep treating it all as a personal trophy to be admired. The ones who matter understand that at this scale they hold something larger than themselves, that their capital touches industries and livelihoods and futures far beyond their own life, and that the only goal left worth having is to make it endure. And far below, on a sunlit tarmac decades ago, a 27-year-old is walking toward a small jet that is not his, pretending to belong, feeling a thought arrive that he is almost ashamed of. He does not know yet that the awareness of that single moment, scaled across a lifetime, ends right here, at the level where the sky itself runs on what he built. This is the seventh thing nobody tells you about flying private. At the highest level, the money is no longer truly yours. You are simply the one trusted to carry it forward. At this level, you endure the payoff. So let me give it all back to you in one breath, because the pattern only reveals itself when you see the whole climb at once. At the first flight, you taste it. At the first charter, you buy. At the membership, you access. At the first aircraft, you own. At the flight department, you operate. At the industry stake, you command. And at the top, you endure. 7 levels, 7 verbs. And notice what they do. They start as things the sky does for you, and they end as things you do for the sky. Here is the thing nobody on YouTube will tell you about flying private. The aircraft was never the point. The jet is just the visible shadow of an internal climb, from someone who pretends to belong, to someone who buys access, to someone who owns the capability, to someone the entire industry quietly depends on. The plane on the tarmac is only ever a measure of which version of yourself you have become. Most people chase the flight and never build the person underneath it, which is exactly why most people taste that first cabin once and spend the rest of their lives trying to feel it again. Remember the 27-year-old on the tarmac, walking toward a jet that was not his, with one bag, pretending this was normal, feeling a thought he was almost ashamed of. He thought he had tasted something out of reach. What he had actually done was see the next layer of the world clearly enough to want to climb into it. The awareness that got him through that flight is the identical awareness, only scaled, that carries a person all the way to owning the sky others fly through. Same person, same hunger, different altitude. If this video changed how you think about wealth, hit subscribe, because this channel is built for the version of you that is climbing quietly while everyone else is just booking the flight. The first time on that tarmac is the one that wakes you up. Go build the life that makes it ordinary.